Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stood outside the massive doors of the Galactic Council building. His military uniform felt tight after months of combat, and the bright lights of the space station made him squint. He had been fighting for 3 years straight, jumping from planet to planet, saving colonies from attacks. Today was supposed to be his big day, the day he finally got recognized for everything he had done. The doors opened with a soft whoosh, and Jake walked into the biggest room he had ever seen. The ceiling stretched up so high he couldn't see. The top and strange alien beings sat in floating chairs all around him. Some looked like giant lizards, others had tentacles instead of arms, and a few looked almost human but with weird-colored skin. Captain Jake Thompson, boomed a voice from somewhere above. A massive creature with green scales and yellow eyes floated down toward him. You have done something truly special. The attack on Nexus Colony could have killed everyone there. Over 50,000 people are alive today because of what you did. Jake felt his chest swell with pride. This was it. This was his moment. He had fought day and night for a week to stop those raiders. He had lost half his team, but they had saved everyone. Maybe they would give him his own ship, or a promotion to general, or at least enough money to finally retire and see his family again. As a reward for your brave service, the scaly creature continued, we present you with this. Jake waited for them to bring out a medal or a certificate. Instead, a small figure shuffled into the room from a side door. It was barely 5 feet tall, with pale blue skin that looked almost gray under the harsh lights. The creature's shoulders were hunched forward, and it kept its head down like it was afraid to look at anyone. This is Zyla, the council leader said with what Jake was pretty sure was a smirk. She is part of our rehabilitation program. She will be your companion. Jake stared at the small blue figure. Her skin had marks all over it. Some looked like old cuts, others like burn marks. Her clothes were too big for her thin frame, and she stood there shaking slightly like a scared animal. I'm sorry, what? Jake said, trying to keep his voice respectful. I don't understand. She needs someone to take care of her, another council member chimed in. This one looked like a giant insect with too many eyes. Think of it as community service. Jake heard snickering from some of the other aliens in the room. A few of them were whispering to each other and pointing at him. He felt his face getting hot with embarrassment and anger. Sir, with respect, I've been fighting for 3 years, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. I saved an entire colony. I lost good friends doing it. You want to give me ... babysitting duty? The green-scaled leader's eyes narrowed. Are you questioning the wisdom of the Galactic Council, Captain? Jake looked around the room at all the alien faces staring down at him. Some looked amused, others looked bored, and a few looked downright hostile. He realized he was in no position to argue. He needed the Council's support to keep his job, to keep fighting the good fight, to keep protecting innocent people. No, sir, he said quietly. I'm honored by your ... generous gift. Excellent, the leader said, floating back up to his chair. Zyla, go with your new guardian. Try not to be too much trouble. Jake watched as the small blue figure Zyla shuffled toward him. She still hadn't looked up once during the entire exchange. When she got close enough, he could see that her hands were shaking. She stopped about 3 feet away from him like she was afraid to get too close. Come on then, Jake said. Not unkindly, but not exactly warmly either. He was still trying to process what had just happened. All those years of fighting, all those sacrifices, and this was his reward. A damaged alien girl who looked like she might fall over if someone spoke too loudly. They walked through the corridors of the space station in complete silence. Jake's boots echoed loudly on the metal floors, while Zyla's soft shoes made almost no sound at all. People they passed stared at them curiously. Some of Jake's fellow soldiers nodded at him respectfully, but he could see the confusion in their eyes when they looked at his companion. Thompson? Called out a familiar voice. It was Rodriguez, one of the other captains. Heard you got quite the reward from the council. That's interesting. Jake could hear the barely contained laughter in his friend's voice. Yeah, well, they said she needed help, he replied, trying to sound casual. I'm sure she'll be very helpful, Rodriguez said with a grin before walking away. Jake felt his jaw clench. This was going to be all over the station by tomorrow. The hero who saved 50,000 lives got stuck with babysitting duty. Some reward. When they reached his quarters, Jake pressed his hand against the scanner and the door slid open. His apartment was nothing fancy, just a bedroom, a small living area, and a kitchen. But after years of sleeping in bunkers and on transport ships, it felt like luxury to him. You can... ... Jake started to say, then realized he didn't know what to tell her. Where was she supposed to sleep? What did she eat? Did she even speak English? Zila solved the problem by walking straight to the corner of the living room and sitting down on the floor. She pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, making herself as small as possible. You don't have to sit on the floor, Jake said. There's a couch right there. She didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the wall. Jake ran his hands through his hair. What was he supposed to do with her? He was a soldier, not a social worker. He dealt with problems by shooting them or blowing them up. This was way outside his area of expertise. Are you hungry? He asked. Still no response. Do you need anything? Nothing. Jake sat down on his couch and looked at her. In the better lighting of his quarters, he could see that the marks on her skin were definitely scars. Some looked old, others looked more recent. Whatever had happened to her, it had been bad. He also noticed something else. She was watching everything. Even though she kept her head down, her eyes were constantly moving. She was looking at the door, the windows, the vents, mapping out the entire room. It was the kind of behavior he recognized from soldiers who had been through too much combat. Look, Jake said finally, I don't know what happened to you before, but you're safe here. I'm not going to hurt you. For just a moment, Zilla's eyes flicked up to meet his. They were large and dark, almost black, and there was something in them that made Jake's breath catch. Intelligence, despite everything, the scars, the fear, the way she made herself small. There was definitely intelligence there.
Then she
Looked away again, and Jake wondered if he had imagined it. He got up and went to the kitchen. Wasn't much of a cook, but he could manage basic meals. Made 2 portions of pasta and sauce, figuring it was probably safe for most species. He put one plate on the table and set the other on the floor next to where Zyla was sitting. Should eat something, he said. She stared at the plate for a long time before carefully picking it up. She ate slowly, taking small bites and chewing. Carefully, like she wasn't sure if the food was safe. Jake ate his own meal in silence, stealing glances at his new roommate. This wasn't how he had imagined his reward ceremony going. He had pictured medals and promotions and maybe a nice speech about his heroic service. Instead, he was babysitting a traumatized alien girl who seemed afraid of her own shadow. But as he watched her eat, something stirred in his chest. It wasn't attraction. She was clearly damaged and afraid, and Jake wasn't the type to take advantage of someone vulnerable. It was something else, maybe protectiveness or just basic human decency. He had spent years protecting people.
act.
Was what he did. Protected colonies from raiders, civilians from soldiers, the weak from the strong. Maybe this wasn't such a strange reward after all. Maybe the council had seen something in him that made them think he was the right person for this job, or maybe they were just messing with him because they thought it was funny. Either way, Zyla was here now, and she was his responsibility. He had never walked away from a mission, and he wasn't going to start now. Tomorrow, I'll show you around. The station, he said. Help you get settled in. She looked up at him again, and this time he was sure he saw something there. Maybe gratitude, maybe just surprise that someone was being kind to her. Thank you, she whispered, so quietly he almost didn't hear her. It was the first time she had spoken, and her voice was soft and musical, with an accent he couldn't place. Despite everything, Jake found himself smiling. You're welcome, he said. We'll figure this out together. As he got ready for bed that night, Jake couldn't help but think about the strange turn his life had taken. A few hours ago, he had been a war hero expecting a grand reward. Now he was sharing his quarters with a mysterious alien girl who seemed to jump at every shadow. But maybe, just maybe, this would turn out to be more interesting than any medal or promotion could have been. The first week with Zyla was like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. Jake would wake up every morning to find her sitting in the exact same spot in the corner. Knees pulled up to her chest, watching everything with those dark eyes. She never moved during the night, never made a sound, and Jake started to wonder if she even slept. "Good morning," he would say each day, and she would nod slightly, but never respond with words. Jake tried different approaches, sometimes cheerful, sometimes quiet, sometimes just ignoring her completely. Nothing seemed to work. The other soldiers on the station had started to notice his strange companion. During meals in the cafeteria, Jake would sit alone while Zyla found a corner table as far away from everyone as possible. She ate slowly, carefully, always scanning the room like she expected trouble. "Hey, Thompson," called out Lieutenant Davis one morning. "How's your new pet project going?" Jake felt his jaw tighten. "She's not a pet, she's a person, right?" "Sorry," Davis said, though his smirk suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "How's your new babysitting job then?" Jake wanted to punch him, but that would only make things worse. Instead, he grabbed his food tray and went to sit with Zyla. She looked surprised when he sat down across from her, but she didn't get up and leave like he expected. "You don't have to sit by yourself," Jake said quietly. "I know everyone's staring, but they'll get used to you." Zyla glanced around the room at all the faces looking their way. "They think I'm weak," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They don't know you," Jake replied. "Neither do I, really. But that doesn't mean you're weak." She looked at him with those intelligent eyes, and Jake could see her trying to figure out if he was being honest or just trying to make her feel better. The breakthrough came during the third week, completely by accident. Jake was in his quarters, working on reports when the lights suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red, and an alarm started blaring. "Attention all personnel," came the announcement over the intercom. "We are experiencing a critical system failure in the environmental controls. All non-essential personnel, please remain in your quarters." Jake grabbed his emergency kit and headed for the door. "Stay here," he told Zyla. "I'll be back as soon as I can." But when he reached the engineering deck, he found chaos. The chief engineer, a gruff man named Peterson, was shouting orders at his team while they ran around checking different systems. "What's the situation?" Jake asked. "The main environmental processor is overloading," Peterson said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "If we can't fix it in the next hour, we're looking at total life support failure. That means everyone on this station dies." Jake felt his stomach drop. "What do you need?" "A miracle," Peterson muttered. "The system is fried. We can't figure out what's causing the overload, Captain Thompson," came a soft voice from behind him. Jake turned to see Zyla standing in the doorway. She looked terrified, but she had followed him anyway. "Told you to stay in the quarters," Jake said, not unkindly. She looked around at all the panicking engineers. "May I see?" Peterson looked at Jake like he was crazy. Wait. "Don't have time for this, Thompson. Get your girlfriend out of here." "She's not my girlfriend," Jake said automatically. "But Zyla, what do you want to see?" She walked over to the main control panel, her eyes scanning the dozens of screens. Showing system readouts, engineers were all shouting at each other, running diagnostics, checking connections. But Zyla just stood there, quiet and still, watching everything. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a screen that showed power distribution. "The problem is there." Peterson looked where she was pointing. "That's impossible. That circuit is supposed to be isolated." "It's not isolated," Zyla said quietly. "Look at the power flow. It's creating a feedback loop through the backup systems. You need to reroute the power through the secondary grid, but first you have to disconnect the emergency backup from the main line." Peterson stared at her. That's actually possible. But how did you double quotes try it," Jake said. "We have to lose." It took Peterson's team 15 minutes to make the changes Zyla had suggested. The alarm stopped. The lights came back on. The environmental systems hummed back to life. "I don't believe it," Peterson said, staring at his readings. "It actually worked. How did you see that? My team's been working on this for hours." Zyla shrugged. "I watched how everything connected. The weak parts always show themselves first." Jake looked at her with new respect. Where did you learn about systems like this? Back home, she said simply. We had to understand how everything worked together to survive. On the way back to their quarters, Jake couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. You saved everyone on this station, he said. You realize that, right? Zyla shook her head. I just pointed out what was already there. Anyone could. Have seen it? No, Jake said firmly. Anyone couldn't have seen it. You saw something that trained engineers missed. That's not luck, that's intelligence. Over the next few days, word spread about what had happened. People started looking at Zyla differently. Not with pity or amusement, but with curiosity and respect. She was still quiet, still preferred to stay in corners, but she didn't seem quite as afraid. Jake started asking her questions about her home world, about how she had learned to understand complex systems. She was reluctant to talk about it at first, but gradually she began to open up. My people, we weren't strong like humans, she said one evening as they sat in their quarters. We couldn't fight wars or build big armies. So we learned to see patterns, to understand how things worked. The strong ones always thought they knew everything, but they missed the small details. What happened to your people? Jake asked gently. Zyla's expression darkened. They were eliminated. The council said they were dangerous. Dangerous how? They were afraid of what we could see, what we could understand. She looked at Jake with those dark eyes. They thought we were too weak. To matter, they were wrong. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. There was something in her voice, something that suggested there was a lot more to Zyla than anyone realized. Is that why you hide? He asked. Why you make yourself small? Small things don't look dangerous, she said quietly. Broken things aren't threats, so I let them think I'm both. Jake leaned back in his chair, processing this information. But you're not broken, are you? Zyla smiled for the first time since he had met her. It was a sad smile, but it was real. No, I'm not broken. I'm just ... careful. From that day forward, their relationship changed. Jake stopped seeing her as a burden or a responsibility. Instead, he began to see her as a partner, someone with unique skills and insights that complemented his own abilities. When maintenance issues came up around the station, Jake would quietly bring Zyla along. She had a gift for spotting problems. Before they became serious, for seeing solutions that others missed, she never sought credit or recognition, content to help from the shadows. Jake told her one day as they walked through the station's corridors, I think the council gave me exactly what I needed, even if they didn't mean to. What do you mean? Zyla asked. I've been fighting my whole life. Fighting enemies, fighting systems, fighting for recognition, but I never learned to really see things the way you do. You're teaching me that there's more than one way to be. Strong. Zyla looked at him with surprise. You think I'm strong? I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Jake said honestly. You've been through things that would break most people, and you're still here. Still helping, still caring about others. That's not weakness. That's incredible strength. For the first time since he had met her, Zyla stood up straight. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted slightly, and Jake caught a glimpse of who she really was underneath all the fear and trauma. Thank you, she said, for seeing me. Thank you for letting me, Jake replied. As they continued walking, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was still only seeing the surface of who Zyla really was. There were depths to her that he hadn't even begun to explore, secrets that she kept hidden even from herself. But he was patient. He had learned that the best things in life were worth waiting for, and he had a feeling that getting to know the real Zyla was going to be the greatest adventure of his life. Jake couldn't sleep that night. Something about Zyla's words kept bothering him. She had said her people were eliminated because the council thought they were dangerous. But the official records listed her home world as a simple farming planet that had been destroyed by a meteor strike. The stories didn't match. The next morning, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He waited until Zyla was in the bathroom, then quietly accessed his computer terminal. His military clearance gave him access to most of the station's databases. But what he found in Zyla's file made his blood run cold. According to the official records, Zyla was from a planet called Cythera. The file described it as a primitive world with a small population of farmers and herders. The planet had supposedly been destroyed by a massive meteor impact 3 years ago, with only a few hundred survivors rescued by council ships. But Jake had been in the military long enough to know when something smelled wrong, started digging deeper, using his security codes to access more detailed files. What he found made his hands shake.
Ow.
The first red flag was the rescue mission itself. According to the logs, the council had somehow known about the meteor impact days before it happened. They had ships in position to evacuate survivors before the disaster struck. Jake had been in enough emergency situations to know that kind of timing was impossible unless you knew something was coming. The second red flag was the survivor count, and the official report said only a few hundred people had been saved. But the ship manifest showed thousands of beings had been transported from Cythera. Where had the others gone? Jake spent the next few hours following digital breadcrumbs, accessing files that were buried deep in the system. He found shipping records, personnel transfers, and medical reports. Slowly, a horrible picture began to emerge. The survivors from Cythera hadn't been rescued. They had been captured. Most of them had been sent to research facilities across the galaxy, where they were being studied like lab animals. The few who had been released, like Zyla, had been given false identities and scattered to different worlds. But why? What made these people so special that the Council would destroy an entire planet to get them? Jake's search led him to the restricted archives, files that were sealed with the highest security classifications. He hesitated for a moment, knowing that accessing these could end his career, or worse. But he had to know the truth. The file he found was labeled Cythera Analysis Top Secret. What he read inside made him understand why the Council had been so afraid. The Cytharans weren't primitive farmers. They were the most advanced civilization in the galaxy, possibly in the universe. They had developed technology that could manipulate reality itself, bending the laws of physics like they were suggestions rather than rules. Could create energy from nothing, heal any injury, even bring back the dead. But the most incredible part was how they did it. Scytherns didn't use machines or computers. They used their minds, their consciousness, their very souls to reshape the world around them. Each Cytheran was essentially a living god, capable of rewriting reality with a thought. Jake felt sick as he read the Council's analysis. The politicians and military leaders had been terrified of a people who could end wars with a gesture, could make weapons useless, who could create abundance where there was scarcity. The Cytherans had refused to share their abilities, saying that such power was too dangerous for species that solved problems with violence. So the Council had made a terrible decision. They had created a fake meteor, using their most powerful weapons to destroy Cythera and its people. The official story about a natural disaster was a lie to cover up the greatest genocide in galactic history. But some Cytherans had survived. The Council had kept them alive for research, trying to understand how their abilities worked. They had hoped to create soldiers with Scytheran powers, warriors who could use reality-bending abilities to enforce Council law across the galaxy. Jake's hands were shaking as he read the final reports. The research had failed. The surviving Cytherans had gone into a kind of mental shutdown, their abilities suppressed by trauma and grief. The Council scientists had concluded that the power required a specific mindset, a way of thinking that couldn't be forced or replicated. So they had given up. The survivors had been scattered across the galaxy, given new identities, and forgotten. The Council had convinced themselves that without their homeworld and their culture, the remaining Cytherans were harmless. They had been wrong. Jake closed the files and sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Zila wasn't just a survivor of genocide. She was one of the most powerful beings in the universe, hiding her true nature to avoid being captured again. Everything made sense now. Her ability to see patterns, to understand complex systems, to solve problems that stumped trained engineers. She wasn't just smart. She was operating on a level that normal people couldn't even comprehend. Jake's Zilla's voice came from behind. Are you okay? You look sick? He turned to face her, and for the first time he really saw her. Not the scared, damaged girl he had been taking care of, but a survivor of unimaginable tragedy. A person whose entire world had been murdered by the very people who now claimed to protect the galaxy. I know, he said quietly. I know who you are. Really are. The change in Zyla was immediate and dramatic. The timid posture vanished, replaced by a stillness that was somehow more frightening than any show of anger. Her dark eyes seemed to look right through him, and Jake felt like she was seeing every thought in his head. What do you know? Asked, and her voice was different now, calmer, more controlled, but with an undertone that made Jake's spine tingle. I know about Cythera, he said. I know it wasn't destroyed by a meteor. I know what the council did to your people. Zyla moved closer, and Jake noticed that she wasn't making any sound as she walked. Her feet didn't quite seem to be touching the floor, and the air around her shimmered slightly like heat waves. How much do you know? She asked. Jake swallowed. Hard? I know you're not human. I know your people could do things that shouldn't be possible. Know the council was afraid of you. Are you afraid of me? Zyla asked, and Jake could hear genuine curiosity in her voice. He thought about it for a moment. Was he afraid? She could probably kill him with a thought, could reshape his mind or his body however she wanted. But when he looked at her, he didn't see a monster, saw someone who had been hurt, someone who had lost everything. Someone who had been alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be trusted. No, he said finally. I'm not afraid of you. I'm angry for you. That seemed to surprise her. Angry? What they did to your people, to your world? It's the worst thing I've ever heard of. And they made you pretend to be weak, made you hide. Who you really are, that's not justice. That's not protection. That's just fear and hatred. Zyla stared at him for a long moment, and Jake could see tears forming in her dark eyes. You really mean that? Really do, Jake said. I've spent my whole life fighting to protect people from bullies and tyrants. The council isn't any different. From the raiders I've been fighting, they just have better uniforms. You don't understand, Zyla said, shaking her head. What I am, what I can do, it's dangerous. The council was right to be afraid. My people had power that could destroy entire star systems. In the wrong hands, that power could end civilization. But you're not the wrong hands, Jake said firmly. You've been living here for months, and you've done nothing but help people. You saved this entire station. You could have taken revenge on the council, but instead you chose to hide. That tells me everything I need to know about who you really are. Zyla sat down heavily on the couch, and Jake noticed that she seemed more solid now, more present. I miss them so much, she whispered. My family, my friends, my teachers. They taught me that power without wisdom leads to destruction. That's why we never shared our abilities with other species. We knew what would happen. What would happen? Jake asked. War, Zyla said simply. Every species in the galaxy would want our power. They would fight over it, kill for it, use it to destroy each other. We had seen it happen before, on other worlds. So we kept to ourselves, lived quietly, hurt no one. But the council couldn't accept that, Jake said. No, they demanded we share our technology, our abilities. When we refused, they said we were being selfish, that we were hoarding power that could solve all the galaxy's problems. They couldn't understand that some problems can't be solved with power. Some problems are created by power. Jake felt a deep sadness settling over him. So they destroyed you rather than let you exist. They tried to, Zyla said, and now there was something harder in her voice. But they made a mistake. They thought that by scattering us, by traumatizing us, they could make us forget who we were. They thought they could turn us into broken, harmless creatures. But you didn't forget, Jake said. No, Zyla said, and for the first time since he had known her, she smiled. But it wasn't the sad, gentle smile he had seen before. This smile had teeth. I didn't forget. I just waited. I grew stronger. I learned to hide my power so well that even I sometimes forgot I had it. 2 weeks after Jake learned the truth about Zyla, their quiet life was shattered by screaming alarms and emergency announcements echoing through the station corridors. All personnel, 2 emergency stations, the voice crackled over the intercom. We are under attack by Void Raiders. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Jake jumped up from his desk where he had been reading reports. Void Raiders were the worst kind of enemy beings that existed partially outside normal space and time. They could phase through solid walls, making them nearly impossible to fight with conventional weapons. "Stay here," he told Zyla, grabbing his weapon and heading for the door. "Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone except me." But as he reached the corridor, Jake found chaos, and people were running in every direction, some heading for escape pods, others trying to reach their duty stations. The lights flickered on and off, and Jake could hear the sound of energy weapons firing in the distance. "Thompson!" shouted Captain Rodriguez, running toward him with a group of other soldiers. "The raiders got through our shields somehow. They're tearing through the station like it's made of paper." Jake fell in step with the group as they headed toward the main defense center. "How many?" "At least 30. Maybe more," Rodriguez replied. They hit the power core first, then started working their way through the residential areas. They're not just stealing, they're destroying everything they can find. When they reached the defense center, Jake saw the full extent of the disaster. The main screen showed raiders moving through the station like ghosts, phasing through walls and floors. The security forces were firing at empty air, their weapons passing harmlessly through the attackers. "Can't touch them," said Commander Hayes, the station's military leader. "Every time we get a lock on one, they just phase out of our dimension. It's like fighting shadows." "What about the civilians?" Jake asked. "We're trying to evacuate them to the lower levels, but the raiders are moving too fast. They've already hit 3 residential sectors." Jake felt his stomach drop. The residential sectors. That's where his quarters were. That's where Zyla was hiding. "I have to go," he said, turning toward the door. "Where are you going?" Rodriguez called after him. "To get someone," Jake replied, already running down the corridor.
Yeah.
The journey back to his quarters was like navigating through a war zone. Urgency. Lights cast everything in red shadows, and Jake could hear the sound of destruction from nearby corridors. He passed other soldiers trying to fight enemies they couldn't hit, and civilians huddled in corners hoping the raiders wouldn't notice them. When he finally reached his corridor, Jake's heart nearly stopped. The walls were torn open, equipment was scattered everywhere. He could see the strange shimmer in the air that meant the Void Raiders were nearby. He pressed his hand against the scanner, and his door slid open. Inside, he found Zyla exactly where he had left her, sitting in the corner with her knees pulled up to her chest. But she wasn't alone. 3 Void Raiders floated in the center of the room, their forms shifting between solid and translucent. They looked like humans, but stretched and twisted, with glowing eyes and fingers that ended in sharp claws. Were focused on Zyla, moving closer to her with predatory grins. "Well, well," one of them said, its voice echoing strangely. "What do we have here?" A little blue mouse, hiding in the corner. Jake raised his weapon, but he knew it was useless. The raiders could phase out of normal space whenever they wanted, making them untouchable. "Leave her alone," Jake said, stepping into the room. The raiders turned toward him, laughing. "Oh, look! The mouse has a protector. How sweet." "You can't hurt us, little soldier," another raider said. "We exist between dimensions. Your weapons are toys to us." Jake watched helplessly as the raiders surrounded Zyla. She hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, but Jake could see something changing in her posture. Her shoulders were straightening, her head was lifting, and her dark eyes were beginning to glow with an inner light. "Please," Jake said, trying to buy time. "Just take what you want and go. Don't hurt her. Hurt her." The first raider laughed. "We're going to do much worse than that. We're going to drag her back to our dimension, where she can scream forever, and no one will hear her." The raider reached out with its clawed hand toward Zyla's face. That's when everything changed. "No," Zyla said, her voice quiet, but somehow filling the entire room. "Not anymore." The air around her began to shimmer, but not like the raider's phasing ability. This was different, deeper, more fundamental. Reality itself seemed to bend around her as she stood up. "God." The raider started to say, but then its hand touched Zyla's shoulder, and something impossible happened. The raider, which had been partially translucent, suddenly became completely solid. Its eyes widened in shock as it realized it could no longer phase between dimensions. "How is this possible?" it gasped, pulling its hand back. "You exist between dimensions," Zyla said, and her voice now carried harmonics that made Jake's teeth ache. "But I exist everywhere. In every dimension, in every possibility, in every reality." She raised her hand, and the other two raiders suddenly became solid as well. They tried to phase out, their forms flickering desperately, but they remained. "Trapped in normal space, you're Sithrin," the first raider whispered, backing away from her. "But they're all dead." "We made sure of that." "You made sure of nothing," Zila replied, and Jake could see power radiating from her like heat waves. "You killed my people's bodies, but you cannot kill what we truly are." The walls of the room began to glow with soft blue light. The torn metal started repairing itself, flowing back together like liquid. The scattered equipment lifted into the air and reassembled itself perfectly. "This is impossible," one of the raiders said, its voice filled with terror. "Matter doesn't behave this way." "Matter behaves however I tell it to," Zyla said simply. "Energy, space, time, they're all just words for the same thing. And I speak their language." Jake watched in amazement as his quarters transformed around them, not just repaired, but improved. The walls became stronger, the systems more efficient. The very air itself seemed cleaner and more breathable. "What are you?" the first raider asked. "I am the last daughter of Cythera," Zyla replied, "and the memory of a murdered world. I am the voice of the dead and the promise of justice." She gestured toward the raiders, and they began to change. Their twisted forms straightened, their glowing eyes became normal, their claws became regular fingers. They were still the same beings, but the violence and hatred that had transformed them was being stripped away. "What are you doing to us?" one of them asked, touching his now human face. "I'm showing you what you used to be," Zyla said. "Before the pain, before the anger, before you decided that causing suffering was the only way to feel powerful." Realized that the raiders weren't just becoming human, they were becoming peaceful. The rage that had driven them to destroy was being replaced by something else. Confusion, maybe, or even sadness. "I don't understand," one of them said, tears streaming down his face. "Why aren't you destroying us?" "We came here to hurt people. We hurt you." "Because destruction is easy," Zyla said, and now her voice was gentle again. "Any fool can break something. But to heal, to repair, to make something better than it was, that takes real power." She waved her hand, and the raiders began to fade away. But not disappearing, they were being transported somewhere else. "Where are you sending them?" Jake asked. "Home," Zyla said. "To the families they left behind, to the lives they abandoned when they chose violence. They remember who they used to be now. Let them decide what to do with that knowledge." The room fell silent, except for the sound of Zilla's breathing. The power that had been radiating from her began to fade, and she swayed slightly on her feet. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, reaching out to steady her. "I'm tired," she said, leaning against him. "I haven't used my abilities like that in a long time. I'd almost forgotten what it felt like." "The whole station," Jake said, looking around at the perfectly repaired room. "Can you fix the whole station?" "I already did," Zyla said with a small smile. "While I was dealing with the raiders here, I was also reaching out to every part of the station. Every system is repaired, every person is safe, every raider has been sent home." Jake stared at her in amazement. "You did all of that at the same time?" "Time is just another dimension," Zyla said. "I can work in all of them simultaneously if I need to." A few minutes later, the intercom crackled to life again. "All personnel, this is Commander Hayes. The raider attack is over." All disappeared, and all station systems are operating at full capacity. "I repeat, the crisis is over." Jake looked at Zyla, who was now sitting on the couch looking exhausted but peaceful. "They're going to ask questions," he said, "about what happened, about how the raiders were defeated." "Let them ask," Zyla said. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being afraid. My people are dead. My world is gone, but I'm still here. And I think it's time people knew what that means." Jake sat down beside her, still processing everything he had witnessed. What happens now? Now, Zyla said. I stop pretending to be weak. I stop letting fear control my life. I start being who I really am. And who is that? Jake asked. Something incredible had happened during the raider attack. The official reports talked about a system malfunction that had somehow sent the raiders away. But the people who had been there knew better. Jake was in the cafeteria the next morning. When he overheard two engineers talking in hushed voices, "I'm telling you, I saw her," one of them said. "The blue girl who lives with Thompson. She was glowing, man. Actually glowing. The walls around her were fixing themselves." "That's impossible," the other replied. "People can't do things like that." "Then you explain how every single system on this station is working better than it ever has before," the first engineer shot back. "The power grid is running at 150% efficiency. The air recyclers are producing cleaner air than when they were brand new." Something happened, and it wasn't a malfunction. Jake felt his stomach tighten. He had known this moment would come, but he wasn't sure either of them was. Ready for it? The summons came that afternoon. A formal message on official council letterhead requesting both Jake and Zyla to report to the main conference room for debriefing. Jake recognized the name at the bottom, Commander Vexstar, the same council leader who had originally given him Zyla as a reward. "We don't have to go," Jake told Zyla, as they prepared to leave their quarters. "We could take a transport off the station, disappear somewhere in the outer colonies." Zyla shook her head. "I'm done running. I'm done hiding. If they want to talk, we'll talk." When they arrived at the conference room, Jake saw that this wasn't going to be a simple debriefing. The room was filled with council officials, military commanders, and people in suits that Jake didn't recognize. At the head of the table sat Commander Vexstar, his reptilian eyes fixed on Zyla with an expression that was hard to read. "Please, sit," Vexstar said, gesturing to two chairs at the opposite end of the table. "We have much to discuss." Jake and Zyla took their seats, and Jake noticed that several of the people in the room were recording everything with hidden devices. This was more than a debriefing. It was an interrogation. "Yesterday's events were quite remarkable," Vexstar began. 37 Void Raiders attack our station, and somehow they all simply disappear. No weapons were fired, no casualties were reported, and yet our enemies vanished without a trace. Paused, looking directly at Zyla. "Even more remarkable, our engineers report that every system on the station is now operating at levels we've never seen before, almost as if someone had completely rebuilt everything from the ground up." "That's good news, isn't it?" Jake said carefully. "No one was hurt, and the station is better than ever." "Oh, it's very good news," Vexstar replied. "But it's also impossible, unless—" He leaned forward, his yellow eyes narrowing. "Unless we have someone with abilities far beyond what we initially believed." The room fell silent. Jake could feel the tension in the air, could see the way everyone was staring at Zyla. She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Jake asked. "I'm suggesting," Vexstar said slowly, "that our little refugee isn't quite what she appears to be. In fact, I'm beginning to think she might be something far more valuable than we realized." One of the men in suits leaned forward. "Our analysis of the station's systems shows evidence of reality manipulation on a scale we've never encountered. The molecular structure of the walls has been altered. The power grid has been fundamentally redesigned, and the air itself has been changed at the atomic level. Only one species in recorded history has ever demonstrated such abilities. Another," official added, "the Scytherans. They were all destroyed years ago." Jake felt Zyla tense beside him, though she showed no outward sign of it. "All destroyed," Vexstar repeated. "Or so we believed. But perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps one or two survived, scattered to the winds, hiding among the refugees we so generously rescued." "What are you getting at?" Jake demanded. "I'm getting at the fact that we may have had one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy living right under our noses," Vexter said, his voice rising with excitement. "Do you understand what this means? The applications for military use alone could revolutionize warfare. Military use." Jake stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "She's not a weapon. She's a person. She's a resource," corrected. One of the suited officials. A resource that belongs to the Galactic Council. We saved her from her dying world, gave her shelter and protection. She owes us her cooperation. That's when Zyla finally spoke. Saved me, she said quietly, her voice carrying that strange harmonic quality Jake had heard before. You didn't save me. You murdered my people. The room erupted in whispers and gasps. Vexstar held up a hand for silence. That's a very serious accusation, he said. Do you have proof of these claims? I have memories, Zyla replied, standing up slowly. I have the voices of the dead crying out for justice. I have the knowledge of what really happened to Cythera. Even if that were true, Vexstar said, you're still under council protection. You still owe us your loyalty. I owe you nothing, Zyla said, and now the air around her began to shimmer. But I'll give you something anyway. I'll give you a choice. Jake watched as everyone in the room began to look nervous. Some of the officials reached for weapons, others started backing toward the doors, but Zyla made no threatening moves. She simply stood there, radiating quiet power. You can try to capture me, she said. You can try to force me to use my abilities for your wars and your conquests. But if you do, you'll learn exactly why my people chose to hide from the galaxy. You'll learn what happens when someone with unlimited power decides they've had enough of being afraid. Is that a threat? Vexstar asked, though Jake could hear the fear in his voice. It's a promise, Zyla replied. O.R. You can choose differently. You can choose to be better than you were. You can choose to build instead of destroy, to heal instead of harm, to protect instead of exploit. She raised her hand, and Jake felt a strange sensation wash over the room. It wasn't threatening. It was the opposite. It was like being wrapped in warmth and safety, like coming home after a long journey. I can show you wonders beyond your imagination, Zyla continued. I can help you create a galaxy where no one goes hungry, where diseases are cured instantly, where wars become impossible. Because everyone understands that we're all connected. I can give you paradise. And what do you want in return? Vexstar asked. Just as Zyla said simply, truth. An end to the lies about what happened to my people. And a promise that this kind of genocide will never happen again. The room fell. Silent as everyone considered her words, Jake could see the struggle on their faces, the temptation of unlimited power warring with the fear of losing control. Finally, one of the younger officials spoke up. What guarantee do we have that you won't use your power against us? Zyla smiled, and for the first time since Jake had known her, it was a completely genuine smile. The same guarantee I've been giving you every day for the past year. I've had this power all along, and I've used it only to help people. I healed your station. I sent the raiders home safely. I could have destroyed you all 1,000 times over. But I didn't. Why not? Vexstar asked. Because my people taught me that true power isn't the ability to destroy, Zyla said. It's the ability to choose not to destroy even when you have every reason to do so. It's the ability to forgive, to heal, to build something better from the ashes of what was broken. She looked around the room at all the faces staring at her. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something greater than anything you've ever imagined. I'm offering you the chance to create a galaxy where power is used to lift people up, not tear them down. And if we refuse, Vexstar asked, then I'll leave, Zyla said. I'll find some quiet corner of the galaxy where I can live in peace, and you'll never see me again. But you'll always know that you had the chance to change everything, and you chose fear instead. Jake watched as the council officials whispered, among themselves. He could see the moment when they made their decision, could see the fear winning out over hope. I'm sorry, Vexstar, said finally, but we can't take that risk. You're too dangerous to be left unsupervised. I figured you'd say that, Zyla said sadly, which is why I'm not asking for your permission anymore. The change was immediate and overwhelming. The walls of the conference room became transparent, showing the vast expanse of space beyond. The table transformed into a garden, with flowers blooming in impossible colors. The air filled with the sound of music that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. What's happening? Someone shouted. I'm showing you what's possible, Zyla said, her voice now echoing with the power of stars. I'm showing you what my people could have given you if you hadn't chosen to destroy us out of fear." Jake felt himself lifted gently into the air, along with everyone else in the room. They floated in a space that was both the conference room and something infinitely larger, surrounded by visions of worlds where technology and wisdom had created perfect harmony. "This is what we offered you," Zila said, her voice filled with infinite sadness. "This is what you rejected. This is what you killed my people to prevent."